Alright, this is going to be lecture 3 of Unit 1, and the title of this lecture is going to be The Atlantic Slave Trade. So background to the slave trade, both sugar plantations and tobacco farms required a lot of labor. Europeans had planned to use Native Americans for labor. So when Europeans first came over, when the first Spanish Europeans came over and settled in what is now the Caribbean and what is the present day Bahamas, they set up these sugar plantations and tobacco farms. I had told you earlier in the previous lecture that John Rolfe had stolen a tobacco seed from the Caribbean and brought it to Jamestown. So the Spanish and the Spaniards were already using um, slave labor in the Caribbean and in Mexico to work their sugar plantations and tobacco farms, and they had used the natives on those islands and in Mexico. Well, the English in the New World, in the present day United States, uh, were also going to do the same thing. They were going to use the Native Americans. But there were a couple problems with using Native Americans as workers on the tobacco farm and on the sugar plantations. One, they were familiar with the land, so they were able to escape very easily. Two, as we talked previously in other lectures, disease had killed off millions of Native Americans, so there weren't really a lot left to use as workers. And three, they weren't really used to hard labor that came with working on these plantations. Yes, they did farm and yes, they did hunt, but these were very labor intensive jobs working on these tobacco farms and sugar plantations. Because of these three problems, Europeans in the New World looked to a new source of workers, and that was West African slaves. So slavery had already occurred in West Africa prior to this, and Europeans would take advantage of that. So the demand for slaves in the New World. For Europeans in America, African slaves were a good solution to this problem of where was this labor going to come from. All right, they were resistant to disease. Okay, so West African slaves had already come into contact with Europeans prior to these explorations into the New World. Europeans were already trading with people in West Africa, and vice versa. So they were resistant to disease, so they weren't killed off by things like smallpox and the flu. They knew how to farm. They didn't know the land once they got brought over to the New World because they obviously hadn't lived there before or didn't live there, so they weren't able to escape easily, and their skin color made them easy to identify. So the Atlantic slave trade soon develops. So the Atlantic slave trade, the definition of the Atlantic slave trade is the buying and selling of Africans for work in the New World. And like I said previously, it started with the Spanish and the Portuguese, and most slaves did end up in Brazil prior to slaves coming to Jamestown and coming to the New World. But like I said before, some did go to the Caribbean, and some did go to central Mexico. English colonies need for slaves. So when the English colonized America, they often brought over indentured servants. Indentured servants, if you remember from John Green's crash course, is a person who agrees to work in America for a specific period of time in exchange for passage. So these were poor white Europeans that could not afford uh, the passage on the boat into the New World. They wanted to get to the New World to start a new life, but they couldn't afford it. So what they did is they would go to these wealthy landowners and they would say, "Hey, if you pay for my passage, I will come over to the New World, work for you, and pay off my debt, however long or however much and however long that would be." So that's kind of what indentured servants is. The problem with indentured servants is indentured servants are usually going to work off their debt and then they're going to be be set free. And that kind of leads into what I just said. Indentured servants, problems with indentured servants, eventually they're allowed to go free. All right, so freed servants, these freed indentured servants need land. They got to have a job or need area to farm and start conflicts with society. So that leads into Bacon's Rebellion. These indentured servants need land. So a group of Virginians at the time, some of them were freed indentured servants, demanded Indian land. Okay, they demanded that the governor of Virginia step in and take away land from the Native Americans and give it to these indentured servants because there was just no really land for them to have at the time. Well, the governor of Virginia didn't want any conflict with the Native Americans, and he kind of sides with the Native Americans and tells the indentured servants, "Hey, I'm not going to give you this land, or I'm not going to take this land away from the Native Americans." So these rebels or these indentured servants, led by a man by the name of Nathaniel Bacon, end up starting a riot because of it, burn Jamestown, and nearly kill the governor in this, rage of not being able to have land. So this would be later be known as Bacon's Rebellion. So what was the results of Bacon's Rebellion? Well, Bacon's Rebellion scares the nobles or the high society in Virginia, and they start looking at a source of labor that won't cause them these problems. And they finally find that solution. That solution is West African slaves. Why? Because they'll never be set free. The slavery business. So England in the English colonies quickly become the largest carrier of slaves. From 1690 to 1807, the English transport about 1.7 million slaves to the Americas. Okay, so that would be about the size of 400,000 acres of land in the United States today. So that's a large amount of people being shipped across the Atlantic. So triangular trade, and from the first lecture, I talked about the Columbian Exchange. Triangular trade and the Columbian Exchange are two different things. The triangular trade is the transatlantic trade involving slaves, raw materials, and manufactured goods. Okay, so the triangular trade starts in Europe. Europeans take manufactured goods or finished goods like iron bars, glass beads, guns, cotton cloth. They take them to Africa. They trade those manufactured goods for slaves. The slaves go on what is known as the Middle Passage. The Middle Passage is a journey that goes across the Atlantic to the Americas. Some go to the Caribbean, like I said. Some go to Mexico, what is present-day Mexico. Some go to South America, but a lot go to North America and the present-day United States. There we have raw materials, all right, sugar, tobacco, cotton, and rum are all grown, made in the New World, and then those raw materials are taken back to Europe to be made into the manufactured goods. So we have this triangular trade between the Old World and the New World. Like I just said before, the Middle Passage was the journey or the trip from Africa to the Americas that the West African slaves went on, marked by terrible cruelty and awful conditions. So, final figures. Over 12 million Africans were enslaved in the Americas. Only about 5% actually came to the modern United States. Most of those went to the southern colonies. Like I said before, some did go to the Caribbean, some did go to present-day Mexico, and some did go to South America. The slave trade was outlawed in 1808.